In the crisp mountain air of 222 BCE, high in the narrow passes of Laconia, where the Eurotas River carves its final path to the sea, King Cleomenes III of Sparta stood atop a wind-swept ridge at Sellasia, his crimson cloak snapping like a bloodied banner, surveying the last army his dying city could muster, 2,000 citizen hoplites forged in the Agorges crucible, their bronze shields gleaming under the Peloponnesian sun, backed by 4,000 helots freshly armed with iron-tipped spears and the promise of freedom, a revolutionary gamble that had already seen Cleomenes cancel debts, redistribute land, and execute ephors who clung to the old Lycurgan order, all to confront the Macedonian juggernaut of Antigonus Doson, whose 30,000 veterans, 10,000 phalangites armed with the dreaded 18-foot Sarissa, 10,000 mercenary peltasts, 3,000 cavalry under Philopoemen's command, and a siege train of catapults marched south to crush the Spartan revival and restore Achaean puppet kings to the Peloponnese. The battleground itself was a natural killing field, two steep hills, Eva and Olympia, flanking a narrow valley barely 800 yards wide, with the chaotic Onas stream cutting the center, a terrain Cleomenes knew intimately from childhood hunts, and he deployed his forces with desperate precision, placing his 2,000 Spartiates and Perioikoi on Eva's eastern slope in a deep phalanx 8 ranks thick, the 4,000 emancipated helots under his brother Euclides on Olympia to the west, and a screen of light skirmishers in the valley to harass the enemy advance, betting everything on the high ground and the unbreakable Spartan shield wall against the longest spears in the Greek world. Cleomenes had not always been a revolutionary. Once a conservative king married to Agis IV's widow, he had watched his brother-in-law's reforms, freeing helots, equalizing land, end in execution by the ephors in 241 BCE, a lesson burned into his soul that Sparta's survival demanded radical surgery, and by 235 BCE, with the citizen body dwindled to fewer than 700 full Spartiates, he struck, seizing the ephorate, exiling rivals, cancelling debts, redistributing 4,000 kleroi to loyal perioikoi and freed helots, and training a new army where former slaves drilled beside red-cloaked equals, a social earthquake that terrified the Achaean League and drew Antigonus Doson into the fray under the banner of restoring order. The Macedonian king, a cautious strategist fresh from victories over the Illyrians, accepted the challenge not out of love for Achaea, but to secure the Peloponnese as a buffer against Ptolemaic Egypt, and he marched with a combined arms force that dwarfed anything Sparta had faced since Plataea, his phalanx the backbone, 16 ranks deep, Sarissas leveled in a forest of iron points projecting 15 feet beyond the front rank, flanked by Thracian peltasts with Rhomphaea swords and Cretan archers whose composite bows could outrange Spartan javelins by 100 yards. Dawn on the day of battle broke with a crimson haze over Mount Parnon, and Cleomenes, standing beside his standard-bearer on Eva, watched the Macedonian host deploy with mechanical precision. Antigonus placed his 10,000 phalangites in the center under his direct command, the feared white shields on the right, the bronze shields on the left, 1,200 Illyrian light infantry screening the front, and Philopoemen's 3,000 Achaean cavalry split between the wings, while on the Spartan side, the helots on Olympia, many former slaves who had never held a shield until Cleomenes' reforms, gripped their spears with white-knuckled hands, chanting the paean to Castor and Pollux as Euclides walked the line, promising, "Hold today, and tomorrow you dine as citizens." The first clash came at mid-morning, when Antigonus launched a feint across the Onas stream, sending 2,000 peltasts to probe the valley. Cleomenes countered with his own skirmishers, and for 2 hours the center dissolved into a chaotic duel of javelins and sling stones. The helot light troops surprisingly holding their own under the direction of a perioikoi captain named Damoteles, buying time for the main phalanxes to lock shields and dress ranks. By noon, the real battle ignited. Antigonus ordered a double envelopment. Philopoemen's cavalry thundered down the western flank toward Olympia, while the Macedonian, right under the white shields, ascended Eva against the Spartan elites. On Olympia, Euclides' helot phalanx, 8 ranks deep but armed with shorter 8-foot Doru spears, met the Achaean horse in a storm of dust and bronze. The front rank knelt with shields locked, spears braced against the ground, while the rear ranks hurled javelins overhand, unhorsing dozens of Philopoemen's knights. But the cavalry's momentum carried them around the flank, and suddenly the helots faced encirclement, their left crumbling as Cretan archers poured arrows into exposed backs. Euclides, roaring orders from the center, tried to wheel his formation into a defensive square, but the helots, brave but untrained in complex maneuvers, began to waver, And when a Thracian romphare cleaved through 3 men in a single swing, panic rippled through the line like wind through wheat. Meanwhile, on Eva, the true test of Sparta unfolded. The 2,000 citizen hoplites, veterans of Cleomenes' earlier victories at Dyme and Laodicea, descended the slope in perfect silence, shields overlapping, spears leveled at eye height, crashing into the Macedonian bronze shields with the Othismos push that had broken Persians at Plataea. For 30 minutes, the 2 walls of bronze strained against each other, the Spartan front rank driving their shield bosses into Macedonian chests, butt spikes punching through greaves. While the Sarissa's length became a liability in the close quarters of the hillside, the Macedonian rear ranks, unable to lower their 18-foot pikes over the heads of their comrades. Cleomenes himself fought in the 3rd rank, his ancestral sword, said to have belonged to Leonidas, flashing as he severed a Sarissa shaft and drove his blade through a Macedonian officer's throat, roaring, "For Lycurgus!" As the Spartan line inched forward, the ground slick with blood and broken bronze. But Antigonus had planned for this. As the Spartan right pushed the bronze shields back toward the valley, he committed his reserve. 3,000 elite Agrianians, mountain troops from the Macedonian highlands, scaled the unguarded eastern ridge of Eva under cover of Illyrian slingers, and suddenly the Spartan flank was exposed. The betrayal came not from treachery but terrain. Cleomenes had stripped the eastern slope to reinforce Euclides, and now the Agrianians poured down like wolves, their javelins punching through Spartan backs, their battle cries in a guttural tongue that froze the homioi in terror. On Olympia, the helot line shattered completely. Euclides fell with a Cretan arrow through his eye, and the survivors fled toward the Eurotas, pursued by Philopoemen's cavalry who cut down 1,500 in the first mile. Cleomenes, sensing the collapse, ordered a fighting retreat, but the Macedonian center now advanced unchecked, the Sarissa phalanx lowering into a rolling wall of death that swept the valley clean. By late afternoon, the battle was a rout. Of the 6,000 Spartans and helots who had stood at dawn, fewer than 1,000 remained alive, most wounded, their shields hacked to splinters, their red cloaks trampled into the mud. Cleomenes, blood streaming from a head wound, rallied 200 survivors on a final knoll, forming a circle of bronze as the Macedonians closed in. Antigonus, ever the statesman, offered terms. "Lay down your arms and live." Cleomenes spat blood and laughed. Sparta does not surrender. But his men, citizens and freedmen alike were spent, and when the Agrianians charged, the circle broke. Cleomenes escaped with 40 companions through a mountain goat path, riding north to Gythium, where a ship waited to carry him to exile in Alexandria, his dream of a revived Sparta dying with every hoofbeat. The aftermath was merciless. Antigonus entered Sparta unopposed, the first foreign army to do so since the Persians, abolished Cleomenes' reforms, restored the ephorate, and installed a Macedonian garrison on the Acropolis. The 4,000 emancipated helots were re-enslaved, many crucified along the Eurotas as a warning, their brief taste of freedom ending in screams. Sellasia marked the end of Spartan independence. Never again would a Spartan king command a field army of citizens, and within a generation, the once mighty polis was reduced to a tourist attraction for Roman senators seeking the ruins of valor. Archaeologists today excavate the Eva Ridge, uncovering Sarissa heads embedded in Spartan shield fragments, helot burial pits with iron slave collars, and a single bronze cheekpiece from a Corinthian helmet bearing the lambda of Lacedaemon, silent testament to the day the longest spears in history met the last free phalanx of Sparta and broke it forever.